Hey, what's going on everyone? In 2001, Bandai released the Master Grade Re-Gazi. Today, many Gunpla fans consider it to be a pretty poor Master Grade, with a fairly outdated build, wonky proportions, and a weak transformation. Thankfully, in 2019, after almost 20 years, Bandai finally decided to give the Re-Gazi an update with this, the Master Grade Re-Gazi Custom. Of course, Bandai couldn't just give fans what they wanted. No, instead this kit is pretty much exclusive to their premium Bandai service. It's a real bummer, but still, if you're a fan of the Re-Gazi, you can probably track this kit down, albeit with a pretty hefty markup. As always, we'll be looking at this Master Grade in 4 categories: the build, appearance, articulation, and the gimmicks, / transformation of course, as this suit does have a Wave Rider mode. We'll be giving each a score from 1 to 5, so at the end we can tally it all up for an average score. Also, I'll try to point out as many changes and upgrades as I can from that original kit, just to help you decide if you're cool with getting that much easier to get a hold of 2001 version. Alright, now let's jump right into this build. With there being close to 20 years between the original Re-Gazi and this custom version, naturally this build has quite a few improvements. Even with it being heavily based on that 2001 Master Grade, the majority of this kit actually uses new runners. I'd say a good 75% of these pieces come off brand new runners. Honestly, you only get about 5 or 6 runners from that original kit, and even then, you're only using 2 or 3 pieces for each one. This is basically a brand new Master Grade at this point. Despite all these new pieces though, the engineering here still maintains a lot of that earlier kit's build. These arms are a great example of what I'm talking about. About 3/4 of it are new pieces, so you'd think their build would be completely revamped. But comparing the 2 manuals, you'll find they're basically 1 for 1. The shoulder frame is the same 2 gray pieces sandwiched around a polycap, and the elbow joints are actually reused pieces. Even this newly designed forearm section, which looks like it'd be more modern engineering, is really just the same build as the original, just using new pieces. There's really nothing that groundbreaking here. And yet, these arms fix one of the most glaring flaws from the original kit. Gone is that horrendous seam line running down the front of the arm, instead replaced with very solid part separation. It's so surreal, but this 2019 kit feels right out of 2001, but with much greater attention to detail. For a guy like me that loves old school Master Grade engineering, this kit was incredibly interesting to put together. Seeing all the little improvements and general updates and how they were retrofitted around the original engineering was just fascinating. But I'm rambling here. Let's actually dig into some of the specifics. As expected of a more old school build, you don't get much of an inner frame outside of the legs. There is quite a bit of molded in detail you could paint up here though, but it definitely feels more about function than form. It even retains the need for screws in the knee and ankle joint. Still, that original kit really impressed me by using dedicated yellow pieces for all of the various vents around the suit, and that carries over flawlessly here. Each vent is its own piece, and many have inner frame poking through. This is just phenomenal, as it makes detailing and painting so much easier. Other than that, I found this build to be pretty straightforward. There weren't any crazy bad nubs, the instructions were laid out very well, and I didn't have any issues with pieces breaking off. This is all around great stuff, and something a beginner shouldn't be intimidated by. The part separation was also above average, especially for a retrofitted kit like this. Painting this kit up and making a custom of the Re-Gazi Custom would be a breeze. Speaking of painting, I did do some basic detailing here. Let's run through some of it. Starting with these vents on the side of the leg, there's actually gray inner frame poking through here. You could honestly just leave these alone, but I've always preferred that black on yellow look for my vents, you know? It just takes a few seconds to add black paint onto the inner frame and then snap the vent and armor over top. Literally a 30-second paint job. I will make a note though, that this vent on the inside of the leg doesn't have inner frame poking through. It does have some really nice panel lines though, so I dabbed some black ink in there. The panel lines here are pretty deep, so ink seems to be holding pretty well. I can't say the same for this panel line running outside of the leg though. It's very shallow, and has curved edges too. So basically, unless you carve out this panel line yourself, ink's not really going to hold in here for that long. Onto these skirts, we have some more great yellow vents that I threw some black paint at. Like the leg vents, these long vents on the bottom have inner frame poking through, so real easy to get looking good. Same goes for this long section in the middle. These top 3 vents though are just yellow inserts with no inner frame inside. It's a real quick fix though, as they have some nice hard edges to help keep your painting clean. This chest also needs a bit of paint, specifically for inside of these yellow vents. Again, they're super easy to get paint into. You do get 2 black stickers you could use here, but this is such a quick touch up with a Gundam marker that I kinda wonder why Bandai even bothered to include them. Next up, I added some black into these really unique circular vents on the shoulder. I was kinda nervous they'd be stickers given their weird design, but nope, Bandai actually provided yellow rings to go around this inner frame. Just perfect. Working our way down the arm, we have these molded in pipes on the front that I'm sure would look good if you put some silver over top of them. I just personally haven't gotten around to it yet. We also have these grenade launchers hidden in the forearm. They come in dark blue, but you know they'd look a whole lot better in bright red. They're not a separate piece though, but easy enough to mask around. I personally haven't painted them, as I don't really plan on having these visible. The head has one of my favorite innovations in Gunpla, inner frame for the side vents. Man, I'm sure you know how frustrating it is trying to detail up vents this small, especially when they're molded in. Here though, they're inner frame poking through, so right out of the box they come in gray. These head Vulcans are also inner frame, so they just look fantastic, with no effort needed on your part. I'd like to replace this front camera lens on the head though if I can. It's an extremely tiny sticker, and I have a feeling it'll go missing eventually. It's going to be really annoying to paint though, as it doesn't come as a separate piece, so for the time being, I'm just trying my luck with the sticker. In general, all of this painting was really well thought out on Bandai's part. However, once we get to this backpack, we start running into some issues. The most striking for me are these yellow foil stickers on the wings. They have to fold around these edges and they just don't hold on very well. Mine started peeling up after about 20 minutes. Thankfully, Bandai does provide some nice hard edges, so masking should be pretty easy if you decide to replace them with paint. I do kind of like this reflective finish on these stickers though, so that's what I'm going with for now. After that, we have this red ring around these thrusters. You do get stickers for them, but it's so easy to just line this with a red Gundam marker that there's no reason to ever use them. By the way, the panel lining on the wings here is pretty well done. The lines running on the top look great, and they hold ink very well. Back to this painting, there's this big light blue section on the tail fin. It comes molded into this red piece, so masking is definitely required here. Still, points to Bandai for these purple tips being separate pieces. Color matching this unique purple sounds really frustrating. Other than that, I dabbed some black paint into these barrels on the backpack. They're really only visible from certain angles, but I already had the black paint out, so I went for it. And that about does it for the painting and detailing. While I really went to town with the black painting, most of these could honestly be left alone. Anyway, this Zeta Customs build was one of my favorites in a long time. It's a really interesting build of early 2000s and modern engineering. We'll have to up that original Zeta score from a 3.5 to a very solid 4 out of 5. This kit really does feel like the biggest budget release of 2001, and I'm 100% on board. Now that we've got them all built and detailed up, let's see how we turned out. First off, and probably most importantly, this unique teal green base color is just fantastic. It really pops and makes this kit really stand out on your shelf. I actually think I might like it a little bit more than the originals too, as it seems to be slightly more saturated. The red and dark blue are also great. They're quite a bit darker than you'd expect from a Gundam, but they really blend well with this teal green. I'm also a fan of this yellow, as it has that nice orange hue to it that I really like. And of course, we have this purple on the backpack. It has a very saturated look to it, but I do have to admit the size of these pieces have it looking a little cheap. There's just so much room to get that cheap plastic glare to it, if that makes any sense. Regardless, with all these great colors on the Gundam in front, it's hardly noticeable. All in all, The colors on this Zeta Custom are very well done. Moving to these proportions, they're also pretty solid. This kit slims up the original design ever so slightly, probably just to get it more in line with modern taste, but it really isn't that distracting. Sure, the legs look a bit longer than the original kit, but I found they still retain a lot of that old school master grade bulkiness. There's plenty of space given to these yellow vents, and this new section on the front of the ankle guard adds some nice additional details to keep your eyes busy. The arms are similar, feeling a bit slimmer than I expected, but they more than make up for it by adding a lot of new details, like these pipes on the front and the red sections on the side. I also really love how hefty this chest section is. You'd think it'd also be slimmed up to fit modern standards, especially with how prominent the chest was in that original kit, but Bandai still managed to retain a lot of that old school bulk here. I will note though that I'm not the biggest fan of this new head, specifically its size. It's noticeably shrunken compared to the original kit, and at the wrong angle, it will look a little small. However, thanks to this new design, including a brand new V-fin and these additional vents on the side, I will say it's growing on me. Anyway, these proportions are pretty great. While they're definitely a bit modernized up, there's still quite a bit of bulk found throughout this suit. I honestly don't really notice the slimming up here unless I'm directly comparing the two kits. As far as panel lines go, Bandai was very restrained here. There's really only a few tick marks here and there, and the occasional added line like this on the side of the legs. Really, it's nothing distracting, instead just adding a bit more complexity to the design. You know, despite this suit not having an anime appearance, he does look straight out of an 80s anime. If you'd like a bit more detail though, this suit does come with a set of waterslide decals. This is something I'm sure more experienced builders would really appreciate, as they don't leave any film behind, like dry transfers or peel and stick. I haven't put any on yet, as these are definitely going to require a top coat, and I prefer to keep the plastic kind of bare for these reviews, but after this, I'm totally putting this Amuro Ray emblem on the shoulder. I'm sure it'll add a ton of character to this master grade. Like that build, the appearance of this kit was a great blend of new and old. The colors are just as amazing as the original kits, the proportions do a great job of retaining that old school bulk, and the panel lines are very tastefully done. It's honestly really hard to find faults with this kit's appearance, so I'd say it deserves a perfect 5 out of 5. While I'm sure I could find a nitpick somewhere, come on, this kit just looks great. While this Zeta Custom looks fantastic, it's nothing without some great poses, right? So let's take a look over this articulation. As always, let's start with these feet. They're the exact same build as the original kit, so naturally, you get the usual Zeta Gundam downwards bend, but you also get a slight tilt side to side from a swivel in the toes. Nothing upwards though. The knee has a solid 135-degree bend. Great stuff here. You can also bend it forward for the transformation. As cool as this is, I do have to admit, it makes getting the legs lined up straight a little annoying. The hips have been updated on this kit. The original was just a single ball joint on top, and it was fairly limited. This kit, however, adds a swivel just below. As small of a change as this is, it makes getting decent ground poses much less frustrating. You then get very solid kicks, and some pretty decent splits here. There's also the usual hinges inside the hips to help get them into Wave Rider mode. Thankfully, there is a solid locking mechanism in here, so you don't have to worry about them popping out. Moving up to the waist skirts, the entire front section can tilt upwards for the transformation. It allows for really easy access to that locking mechanism underneath. Other than that, the front skirts are about what you'd expect, being on the standard ball joints. The side skirts, however, are connected to the side of the legs. Because of this, they never really get in the way. If any issues do arise from them though, you can always spin them around for a better angle. Like the original kit, the back skirt is connected via a polycap. However, I found its implementation on this Zeta Custom to be pretty frustrating. See, sometimes you'll want to tilt the legs backwards, either for a katoki pose or just to help offset the weight of the backpack. Doing so though, will usually result in the legs hitting the back skirt and it popping off. This wasn't a huge deal on the original kit, but now that this back skirt is hidden underneath this massive backpack, it's really annoying to reattach. Working our way up to the chest, he has that classic ball joint at the waist, allowing for some decent spins and limited tilts. Bandai did add some additional swivels on top though. You actually get some solid ab crunches here, especially for a Zeta Gundam variant. Of course, depending on the pose, you're going to run into some weight issues with this backpack. Usually this means putting him on an action base to get him up in the air, but doing so almost always has him leaning backwards. This backpack weighs just a bit too much for these chest joints. Still, with enough patience, you can score some really decent poses here. Anyway, back to this articulation. This Zeta Custom has completely revamped shoulder engineering, which allows for a 45-degree pop-out. You also get all new upwards movement as well. This is such a huge upgrade over that single peg on the original. You can actually get some solid shooting poses here. As for the rest of the arm, we get the usual 360-degree spin, standard lateral movement, and the expected full spin from the arm just below. He also has a very solid 135-degree bend from the elbow. It can also move a little backwards to help them fit under his shield when in Wave Rider mode. The wrists on this kit are really unique, being able to tilt pretty far forwards and backwards, no doubt to both help with the transformation and get these grenade launchers working. These hands have been upgraded from that classic trigger finger split to more modern interchangeable fingers. You get a pretty decent selection here, and they look alright, but I've had quite a few issues with these popping out. They just don't stay locked in place. This is part of why I've always preferred those 2.0 style hands instead. Regardless, they work well enough for holding weapons, and the thumb is on its own ball joint. Onto this head, we get a ball joint on 2 hinges. The head is also much smaller than the original, so you get all around great movement. Now let's take a look over this all new backpack. The main fin on the back can of course move up and down, but it can also rotate all the way around when in Wave Rider mode. You can also move the beam saber holders backwards, and the handles themselves can rotate forwards for him to grab. These small wings can swivel around a peg inside the backpack. They were pretty sturdy when I first built them, but after a transformation or two, they really loosened up. It's at the point where they're now basically always slumped down. I ended up adding a bit of glue around the joint, just to tighten it up. I'm not sure for how long though, as this seems to be caused from the friction of the wings rotating, but it seems to be holding for the time being. This articulation is definitely a step up from the original Zeta. While most of these joints are basically the same, there are quite a few that received upgrades, like the hips and shoulders. However, the added weight of this backpack kinda spoils it. All said and done, I'd say this articulation is about average, deserving a 3 out of 5. As much as this kit improves over the original, it's pretty offset by the new weight issues of the backpack. Alright, now let's round out this review by looking over his gimmicks. / transformation, of course. First up, let's tackle the real reason many people are going to pick this kit up, his beam assault rifle. It's just so needlessly realistic, looking like it came from a different franchise entirely. I think a lot of it has to do with this brown section up front, adding a little more realism than we're used to. Bandai seems to agree too, as this brown piece comes as a separate dedicated piece, no painting required. The rest of this rifle's build though is about what you'd expect, being the usual sandwiching of gray pieces with some additional plastic added on top. Despite this rifle just looks fantastic, and he can hold it just fine thanks to a set of dedicated fingers. I pretty much leave this in his hands at all times. I mean, it's like half the appeal of the suit, right? Next up, we have these beam sabers, which are just as unique as that rifle. These sabers are really massive, having handles more fitting of a double Zeta than a standard Zeta variant like this. The blades are also really long. Because of their size, I was a little nervous about him holding these sabers up, but thanks to a set of dedicated fingers, it's not an issue. You can score some really solid beam saber poses here. Just make sure to clear up some space on your shelf if you do. Now we come to his shield. It's basically a carbon copy of the shield included with the original Zeta, even using the same runner for the base. It's a little on the bland side, but admittedly, I also haven't decaled it up yet. He can hold this shield relatively well too, though because it snaps onto the back of the arm, he'll probably look a little awkward when using it. Speaking of the arms, we have these grenade launchers found in each forearm. They have some alright details, but they will require painting to get looking good. Of course, you can always hide them behind these flaps like I'm doing, so you don't really have to worry about them if you don't want to. Lastly, let's finally take a look over this transformation into his Wave Rider mode. Starting off this transformation, you rotate the arms around and slump down the shoulders. You can also bend the arms slightly backwards to help them fit in place. No issues here. After that, you unlock the hips by tilting the back skirt out of the way and pulling out this additional lock. Then you pop out the legs and lock everything back in place with this additional locking mechanism in the front. The locking mechanism in here is pretty great, and I haven't had any issues with these legs popping out. From there, you bend the legs and push in the feet in the usual Zeta Gundam fashion. Finishing up this transformation, you rotate the main fin on the backpack to go over the head, fold open these wings, and attach the shield and rifle underneath. And here we are, the fully transformed Zeta Custom. It's not the hardest transformation, especially considering how crazy other Wave Riders can be, but it still has some major problems. For example, the shield is supposed to lock into the legs, with this little tooth sliding into this slot, but just like the original, it never stays in place. I've also had issues getting the legs lined up properly, and of course the wings tend to get loose and slump down over time. Having said that, the transformation process itself isn't what makes me dislike this Wave Rider. Most of these issues can be worked around with enough patience. What really frustrated me about this transformation was the inability to actually display it. See, while the original kit came with a dedicated stand, albeit a pretty cheap one, here you only get an action-based connector. It attaches at the hips horizontally and doesn't lock in place. So naturally, unless you're angling him straight upwards, he's gonna fall off. I can't tell you how long I spent trying to get good footage of this Wave Rider flying. It just wasn't working for me. I ended up just going for shots like this, of him just kinda awkwardly laying on the table. As weird as this is to say, I think I actually prefer the original Zeta's transformation. Yeah, it was just as buggy as this one, but at least you could display it, you know? I don't think there's any real reason to ever transform this kit, and outside of this review, I'm definitely never gonna do it again. And that about wraps up these gimmicks. While it is your standard arsenal, this rifle and these beam sabers are just so unique. They really separate this suit from the original Zeta. The transformation, though, is still pretty bad. All said and done, I think the solid weapons make up for the Wave Rider, so let's give these gimmicks a solid 4 out of 5. The rifle and sabers are just fantastic. Just make sure to never transform this guy. Alright, it's time to wrap all this up for an average score. The build was a 4 out of 5. Despite being a variation on an older master grade, there's tons of new pieces here, and many of them fix issues from that original kit. The appearance was a perfect 5 out of 5. The colors are great, these proportions are a solid blend of old school bulkiness and modernization, and even the panel lines are well done here. The articulation was a lower 3 out of 5. Technically, he can hit more poses than the original, but the new weight issues from the backpack can be annoying. Lastly, the gimmicks received a 4 out of 5. His arsenal is pretty amazing, and it's totally the selling feature it should be, though the transformation is pretty weak. Tallying all that up and dividing, this master grade Zeta Custom receives a 4 out of 5. In terms of a percentage, it receives an 80%. While that might seem a little low for a 2019 master grade, we also have to remember that this is based on a 2001 master grade. If you're looking for cutting-edge Gunpla engineering, you're not going to find it here. But if you're like me and you're into old-school kits, this Zeta Custom is right up your alley. The build was such a great mix of old and new, and the part separation was really thought out. Beginners will have this kit looking amazing with only a Gundam marker needed. Of course, he looks great regardless, with these great colors and proportions. Not to mention how eye-catching the rifle and beam sabers are. This Zeta Custom is one of my favorite kits in a long time, as it both appeals to my old school taste and gets everything up to modern standards. So naturally, I can't help but highly recommend this master grade Zeta Custom. And that should about do it. Feel free to leave any questions about this kit in the comments, and I'm more than happy to get back to you. You can also subscribe to this channel for more reviews, and check out the Twitter and Instagram. Alright, thanks for watching, and see you next time.